Clive, it's lovely to see you after an absence of a couple of months. But, just reacquainting myself with your story, you have been fighting all of your life from the day that you were born because, when you were born, you weren't expected to live, were you, as a baby?
No, that's absolutely right, and it's wonderful to see you after a couple of months as well, Juliet. So thank you for that. No, it's absolutely true. I was born way back in 1970 in Northern Ireland, and I had a brain hemorrhage at birth, which must have been just incredibly difficult and scary for my mom and dad. My mom was quite young; she was only about 23. They were over in Northern Ireland with no sort of family or friends, no infrastructure to help them. And yes, I was in hospital in and out for the first 6 months of my life. I was actually baptized in hospital. So that gives you an idea of how serious it was. So yeah, it wasn't the best of starts, Juliet.
It wasn't the best of starts, but at the same time, your parents had an inner resilience that they were able to nurse you through those very difficult years to get you through your childhood, to get you into your adulthood, and to live to see some of the milestone events of your life. So, what I'm getting at is, in your case, do you think that some of that resilience was inherited and what you had, you were able to build on it with what you acquired, the knowledge that you acquired from your subsequent illnesses and setbacks?
Yes, I do. I do. And I've reflected on this many, many times. And I think my mom and dad were two very different people. They actually divorced when I was 10, but my dad was quietly strong. He didn't show emotion, he didn't share his feelings, but mentally very strong. He'd been in boarding school, straight in the army, etc., etc. So he was strong. My mom was outwardly strong. She was a powerhouse, really, really mentally strong, a real fighter, right to the day she died. So I think yes, it's in my DNA.
And interestingly, when you tell your story, for you, it starts from 2017. And this is something which I found interesting to reconcile because for me, it starts from day one. For you, it's 2017 because this is when the first of the disasters happened. Because your father, this very strong man, as you described, he's diagnosed with Parkinson's. He's also diagnosed with dementia.
Yeah.
So, what was it like seeing this strong man going into decline? And what's even worse is that you can't stop it.
It was torturous, Juliet. He'd not long retired, which took him a while to adjust because he'd worked all his life, but he was getting into the swing of it. He was a massive sports fan, so he was still playing a bit of veteran sport, but he was watching an awful lot more of it. So when the symptoms started to manifest in terms of shaking his hands and his gait changed and his balance were affected, for somebody like my dad, who was physically strong and a real talented sportsman, it was very obvious. And the diagnosis came with his very first consultation with the specialist. So to watch him change, both physically and mentally, and deteriorate was it was just the impact was enormous. He had a partner, a French lady that they'd been together for 35 years, and she nursed him right to the end. And that's a massive blessing. She deserves a medal the size of a frying pan, really. But it was it was really really tough for all concerned.
What did it do to you personally? Because this is your dad. As you said, this is somebody who you've grown up with. Even though your parents had separated, they were still very active in your life. You saw this
Yes,
strong man planning his retirement. All sorts of things were lined up. They didn't happen. Hard
yeah.
for him. What about you as his son?
Well, I had to view him differently. I had to learn how to speak to him differently, not bombard him with sort of information and be sort of too excited if I'd got some news that I wanted to tell him, because it got to the point where very quickly that you had to speak to him in pieces. You couldn't overload his memory. You couldn't, he would get confused very quickly. And I saw his vulnerability for the first time, which I'd never ever seen. Never seen him cry, never seen him show any signs of being anything other than stable. He was just dad. That was him. So I had to come away and accept that not only was I losing him, but there was some real sort of important conversations that I was desperate to have with him. And I was very quickly losing the opportunity to have them.
Is that one of the regrets that you carry with you in your life, that there were things that you wanted to say and these illnesses robbed you of that opportunity? And how have you reconciled yourself to the fact that these things were left unsaid?
It's a very good point, and I did struggle for a while with the idea that I just can't have those conversations. I actually spoke at his funeral, and that's one thing that I did say at his funeral. I said, maybe one day we'll get together and we'll have the opportunity to have those difficult conversations. But the way I reconciled it with myself is that, if I'm honest, I probably wouldn't have been able to have them with him, because he would just deflect it. You couldn't get that deep with dad. I don't know whether that was something that he was just completely uncomfortable with doing. I don't know whether it was because I was his son. He might have been able to have conversations like that with someone else. But I reconcile myself because I think, well, probably I wouldn't have been able to have them anyway.
And in the work that you do when you talk to people, because yes, you have group sessions, do you have one-to-one sessions with people as well? So is this something which often comes up with people, that perhaps something has happened in the past, that words were not said, feelings expressed, and that could actually impact on their behaviour in terms of relationships, perhaps addiction issues, because things were left unsaid and they haven't found a way forward in their lives to understand that you can't allow yourself to be badgered by guilt. Effectively, you have to move on from this. So is this something which often comes out in some of the sessions that you have with people?
Yes, it is. I discussed the fact that it's like trauma, Juliette. If there's something in your background that is traumatic for you, it's not going to go away. It needs talking about, and we need to put light on it. So if there's something, and I talk about this individuals and groups, but particularly individuals, that if there's a difficult conversation to be had, it needs to be discussed. And if you need help to discussing with a friend or a colleague before you have the conversation with the person we're talking about, well, then so be it. And that does help people. But living with regret is a very difficult state of mind. It's very, very difficult to live with regret. So recognize that the conversations are there. Recognize that there's something that it might just be that you haven't told them that you love them. Make the most of it. Make the most of the time that you have, and say what you need to say.
I think it's such an important point that you've raised there about telling somebody that you love them, because it's one of those expressions, I love you, that people find very, very difficult to say in their everyday lives. And I think particularly for men as well, perhaps they're, dare I say, encouraged not to, particularly if they're in relationships. You can express your love in other ways, perhaps taking somebody out to dinner, buying them flowers, whatever. But to actually say it, that's a bit of a bridge to cross, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. And I think maybe because of the way that I was brought up with my dad, not my mom. My mom would have told me, and did tell me, that she loved me all the time. But I never, ever heard it out of my dad, not once. Not even when he was poorly, not at all. But I tell my boys all the time.
You had a really traumatic time, because there was your father when he was diagnosed with these illnesses, and then you yourself were diagnosed with illnesses. You had the prostate cancer, and you had the motor neurone disease. This is like an unthinkable, unfathomable trinity of disasters, because the third part of this was the anxiety, which led to stays in mental hospitals. What I'd like to know from you is, when the prostate cancer was diagnosed, I mean, I know that you just said, oh, let's get rid of it, but then you were told, hang on, that can't happen because you've got the motor neurone disease. But when this was all happening, did you ever think to yourself, what the hell is the point of life? Because I've lost my dad. I've got all these health problems. My mind is falling to pieces.
Mm.
I just don't really think it's worth continuing here. Did you ever think that maybe it was time to leave life completely?
Mm.
That you would be doing not just yourself, but also
Mm.
family members a favour if you
Mm.
just took your own life?
Just before I went into psychiatric hospital, and certainly for at least the first 2, possibly 3 weeks, my state of mind was this: if I'm a burden to my loved ones now, what am I going to be like in 4, 5, 10 years' time if I get there? They've got their lives ahead of them. They're all incredible, loving, wonderful human beings. They don't need me. I was absolutely positive that they would be better off without me, which sounds incredibly bizarre saying it out loud because I'm so aware of my family as a blessing. But that was my state of mind. It was perspective that allowed me to move from that state of mind. And my wife was the trigger for that perspective coming back into my thoughts. I finally recognized her as, hang on, that's Victoria. I've known this girl since I was 13 years old, and we're a team. Hang on, she's in here now talking to me with all this noise and madness around us. And then she's got to go home and she's got to see to the children. She's got to pay the bills. She's got to do all the normal mundane stuff and then come back tomorrow and visit me, her husband, in psychiatric hospital. I need to get back on that team. I need her and she needs me. And that was the real growth. That was the perspective came, it stayed, and I slowly became stronger.
And unless you've been in that pit of despair, and I know exactly where you're coming from because I have been there, it's very difficult to explain to other people how
Mm.
you do see yourself as a burden to the
Mm.
ones that you love, and how
Mm.
you feel that you're trapped in the room, and it doesn't matter how long you grope around in the dark, you
Mm.
can never find the door handle that lets in
No.
the light. Take me through that journey when you just slipped into this hole.
There were so many characters in there that it made my emotional journey a real tumultuous one. I went from feeling confrontational, being scared, to being really, really confused, and ultimately feeling, well, this is me then. This is me. This is the end point. I've lost my dad. I've now got motor neurone disease. This is a progressive, non-treatable neurological disease. I have stage 2 prostate cancer, which is okay at the moment because it's contained in the prostate, but it is one of the most unpredictable of cancers. And I have that. And I've lost my mental stability. I feel vulnerable. I don't feel strong. I can't face people. This must be the point where I surrender and give in. And that was absolutely where my state of mind was.
It's interesting as well because you're basically alluding to a rock bottom, and you tend to find this is very typical of people who have addiction issues, that you have to find your rock bottom before you can even think about that way up, before you can actually say the way up is there, but you have to believe that it exists.
There were people in there, Juliette, who weren't getting the visits. Who was giving those people encouragement, love, support, and that chink of light? Because I would still be there now if I didn't have the love and support of my family. I wouldn't have been able to pull myself towards mental strength without the pull of the love of my wife.
And I know that you were sectioned twice. Why did that happen? Because you've actually described how you went through the trauma, you were turning that corner, and one would assume, well, actually, why do you need to go back for a second dose of this? What went wrong after the first time?
When I came home the first time, I was clearly not ready to be back into the real world. As much as I thought I was, I absolutely wasn't. And this became apparent within 72 hours of being at home. I don't know whether it was about responsibility or being around those people that I know need me, but I wasn't ready. And I slipped into despair and anxiety very, very quickly.
So you are sectioned again.
Yeah.
How long was that second period for? And
Yeah.
what happened to actually make you feel this is it? I know that I've gone through this and I really can face the world. I really can take on the responsibilities. Not immediately. I know
Yeah.
they're out there,
Yeah.
but I do feel ready to face them.
I had probably 3 weeks in the first period, and then probably, at least 6 to 7 weeks straight, where thankfully I was given time to absorb things that were being said to me, the opportunity to be outside, to walk, to listen to nature, to spend time in doses with my family and friends. And I just slowly became stronger. And I was able to recognize not just where I am, but where I want to be. And that instilled confidence. With confidence came the ability to communicate and articulate once again exactly how I was feeling. And that gave the powers that be the confidence to allow me to go back home.
I know that you've talked in the past about having a loss of identity. Given everything that's happened, that is hardly surprising, but take us through this. What is a loss of identity, and how did the love of family and friends, acquiring that perspective, help you to connect with the new man, the new identity, the man that we see today in this world?
Loss of our identity is something that's faced by a lot of people. A good example is professional sports people. I'm a huge boxing fan, and professional boxers, when they face retirement, have a massive identity crisis because everything about their life has been dictated by being a fighter. So when they have to retire, they're not Paul the boxer anymore, and it's a very, very difficult time. And I can relate to that because the identity crisis for me was many of the hats that I wore so naturally and organically, husband, dad, granddad, friend, they were all natural hats that I wore with pride. But when I came home, I didn't recognize that I still had those hats, although of course I did. But I thought, well, I'm not that dad anymore. I'm not that strong, boisterous, got too much to say, nosy dad. I'm not contributing financially. So I had to accept my position, learn the art of self-compassion, which is really, really important, and give myself the space to think, well, okay, but who's the new Clive? How is the new Clive going to be productive and positive and to be there for his family and his friends and for himself? And there was a few things that I did to do just that.
This is the new Clive, but my sense is that this is a bit of the new Clive. There's more Clive to come.
Yeah.
Is that something that you feel, that perhaps we haven't seen all of you, that you've got so much more to give? So what is the full Clive?
That's a really good point, and I absolutely think that there's more to give. I'm growing all the time. I'm learning, I'm absorbing the world, and I'm looking through life in a completely different lens. And you hear this a lot, if people go through trauma or they have tragedy, they say they look at life differently. But I really do. Somebody said to me, "Oh, come on, Clive, you only live once." I said, "Listen, son, you've got it wrong. We get to live life every single day." And that's the new Clive. Clive's not in denial. I know exactly the position I'm in. The mental challenges are still daily. I have to work on myself. I have to have a word with myself, and I have to remind myself of some of the strengths that I have. But it's an exciting new chapter, and that is the new Clive.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you use that phrase, an exciting new chapter, because like it or not, one of the threads that comes into this story is the motor neurone disease. And I know that in the past you have said that, look, the trajectory of this disease is not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you cope with that knowledge that this does have the potential? It's you have the slow acting version of this disease, but
Mm-hmm.
there is the potential there for it to potentially immobilize you.
Mm.
You have to live with that, but how do you reconcile yourself with that and at the same time find joie de vivre, enjoyment in life? Because some people will feel that perhaps that sense of enjoyment will be compromised
Mm.
because of that gnawing shadow at the edges of their
Mm.
lives.
That does obviously have the ability to compromise my outlook. But there's things. So I go to Oxford every sort of 6 months, and there's an awful lot of poorly people there, and there's an awful lot of people that have the aggressive version. But I remind myself that when I've finished there and I've given blood and I've had my consultation, yes, with a splint, and yes, feeling sometimes sorry for myself, but I get up and walk out. I go to my car and I drive myself home. That's a real blessing. I remind myself that, okay, so I do a lot of volunteer gardening, and there's some things that I perhaps struggle a little bit more this year that I was doing without thinking about it last year. But I concentrate on the things that I can do. I can still cycle. I can cycle better than I can walk at times, and I really, really enjoy it. I immerse myself in the world of podcasts and I educate myself. I listen to music. Music is a therapeutic time machine. It's absolutely incredible. Definitely not talking about the stuff that my 16-year-old listens to, because I just can't call that music. But when I was younger, if it wasn't Paul Weller, I wasn't interested. But not now. Not now. I have an incredible range. So I'm a realist. I have a degenerative disease and I understand the challenges that faces. But this is a vehicle that I use. I have a story to tell. And I have to admit, I enjoy sharing it.
There is the flip side of this, that your life does seem so much more enriched because of the illnesses and the tragedies that you've endured. If it hadn't been for those, where would you be?
I think I'd still be stressed. I think I'd still be trying to make the best of a health and safety consultancy. I would not have the privilege of speaking to the so many varied people that I get to see and share my story with. And I think stress would be a huge part of my everyday life, as it is in so many people's lives. But the perspective that I have now and the lens that I look through now is completely different.
And it's interesting about the use of the word stress, because people assume that stress is one of those things which you only get if you're at the absolute top of your
Mm,
career. In other words, if you're the CEO or if you're the
mm,
founder and the CEO of a massive, massive company, you're deal chasing all
mm.
the time, etc. But the point is that stress hits everybody. It doesn't
Yeah,
choose anybody according to their wealth, their
no,
postcode. It's the randomness of it. And
yeah,
how well you cope with it
yeah.
depends on a combination of things. Some people can handle it very, very well. Some people crumble.
Some people get stressed about something that somebody else, it would just be water off a duck's back. And, we never know what's going on in somebody else's mind, and we don't know how resilient they are. We don't know where they are. They might be out there doing their everyday thing, but emotionally, they're on the red line. And we might not necessarily know that. So, yeah, you're absolutely right, Juliette. I talked about the acute anxiety earlier, and that's very similar. I was not your average candidate to be an anxious guy, but my anxiety was so acute. I can remember vividly thinking that when I was lying in bed, I could see the roof of my house being ripped off by wind and rain, and it was real and it was happening. I could hear it, I could sense it, and what trouble would we be in then, and what could I do about it? That's how vivid it was for me. It's an underlying problem in so many people's lives, and I think the key is to recognize it. Go back to a bit of self-compassion. Look at yourself. Look at your sleeping pattern. Look at your concentration. Look at your focus. Look at your relationships, and recognize it. And once you recognize it and accept it, then you have a chance of addressing it.
But do you think that part of the problem is that there's almost a cultural acceptance of it? That, in other words, if you are leading a company and you've got the fat wage packet to prove it, that you have to accept that stress is part of the job. And if you complain about the stress, that means that you're undeserving, you're not fit to do this job, so it's time to leave it. You are basically told you're not suitable, you're not the right person, so you have to go and make way for somebody else who can do it.
It's almost like you do have to accept it, and if you can't accept it, well, man up and accept it. Somebody said to me, "Oh, come on, Clive, man up," and I just did not know what to do with that, really. I thought, well, hang on a minute. Not only am I in this position, but I'm also having my manhood tested as well, and that became something else that my mind was really struggling with. But yeah, the recognition of stress can be looked at in so many different ways. But as I said before, it's recognizing it, and it's not a weakness to recognize it. To admit to feeling stressed is not a weakness; it's a strength. And you might still be able to carry on and live with the stress. It doesn't mean you've got to surrender and give in your high-powered, well-paid job. Not at all. You can still be strong. You can be a fighter, and you can still hang on to everything that you've built. But you have to do it with real perspective, honesty with yourself. You have to have that conversation with yourself. And then you might just be able to make the adaptations that are required.
And I can see a thought line here that if you have that honesty, that leads to hope, that leads to perspective. And that's how you discover your inner superpower.
Yes.
I know that the superpower phrase is something which features quite predominantly in your talk. So do you see yourself as a superhero because you've found your power, you've gone through the stress, you've taken the positives out of that, you have reconstructed your life, your personality, and the world has no fear for you? Are you a superhero? If not, what are you?
I'm blessed, and something that I feel is gratitude. I feel grateful for the position that I'm in. Talking to people about such sensitive issues is a privilege. It's a privilege because I'm not learning lines. I'm not learning about statistics. I'm sharing my recent authentic story with brutal honesty and a sprinkle of humour. And that is a privilege.
Culturally, people are often made uncomfortable or feel uncomfortable because of that honesty. Is that how do you conquer that people, you're saying to people, look, this is my story, don't flinch from it. You can actually learn. How do you conquer that when you talk to people?
The use of effective communication is absolute key. And I don't stand up and just preach and tell the story and then walk away. I give people the opportunity to not just listen to my story, but to be engaged with it. Ask me questions. As long as you don't want to borrow any money, you can ask me anything you like. And we do that. I don't just stick to a rigid, there's a question and answer at the end. Of course there is, but if there's something that you want to say, if there's something that you want to share, or if there's a question that you've got, I give them the opportunity to ask it, because it opens the conversation for them at a later date.
You know something, you have this very positive mindset, okay? And that's something which you try to share with people. You live that positive mindset every day of your life. It's got you this far and it will take you even further in your life journey. But when you leave an event and you've had those one-to-one sessions with people or group sessions, whatever, what tools do you leave them with so that they can maintain it? Because they can be pumped up today, pumped up tomorrow, but by the end of the week, it could be like not important, and they just carry on, fall back into the same old rut as of the day before.
There's a huge difference between a motivational speaker and an inspirational speaker. And I class myself as an inspirational speaker because I think my words are deeper. to motivate is to invoke an action, whereas the inspirational is more spiritual. And I think that I'm blessed with the ability to genuinely connect with people. So when I leave and they leave, they're thinking about what I've said, but they've engaged with what I've said. They've commented. Even if it's good, bad, or indifferent, we've had a conversation, and that will stay with them and that will allow them to reflect.
Let's look ahead, Clive. Supposing in 5 years' time, you and I meet up and you've decided, okay, then I don't really want to do the inspirational talks and things anymore. I've decided to do something else, whatever. What would you say your legacy will be to this world? What would you like to leave behind when you go on to the next life change, wherever that takes you?
I would like to be able to look back and say that my sessions and my talks and the people that I've met, the stories and experiences that I've shared have longevity. The fact that they've resonated with people means that they stay with them and they use it in real life over a long period of time. They haven't just listened to this ginger bloke chatting at the front and it's a little bit forgettable. Because they're applying it to their own real life, that's what I would like my legacy to be.
Clive, I don't see you as a ginger bloke. I just see you as a guy who's got an amazing story to tell. It's inspirational and it's something which I personally can empathise with as well. There are some elements which really do strike a chord, but in a very, very positive way. And thank you so much for sharing. And please do keep on sharing. In 5 years' time, if we ever meet up, please don't tell me that you've retired and that you're doing something else.
Definitely not.